Thank you so much, Libby and Sandeep, for working with us in this simulation. I'm just a little bit interested to know right now, how are you guys feeling after that sim?
Awesome.
Sweaty.
Sweaty?
Sweaty and tachycardic.
Sweaty and tachycardic, okay. And Lib, other than sweaty, how are you really feeling after a job like that?
I actually feel privileged that I've had the opportunity to do that and no one's died today. You know what I mean? Like, I've been given the opportunity to go through the different stages.
Yeah.
Actually, you know, I don't think that many people would have the opportunity to be delivered, pardon the pun, a model as good as that, and we got to do that today. So as uncomfortable as sim is, the trade-off is that, and the trade-off is well worth it.
Okay,
So,
fantastic.
yeah.
Cool,
Yeah.
and Sandeep?
Well, I mean, those kind of rare emergency surgical or medical procedures we don't get to practice very often at all, and that was so high fidelity. Like, we're really invested in it, and you could see on everyone's faces that they really believed, they knew her, and that she was as sick as she was, and we had to do it. It was indicated, and we did it.
Okay, and I think we're getting this sense of a little bit of tachycardia going on here right now from the monitor going off. I'm a little bit interested in a couple of things, and I'd like to initially start with talking around that concept of the self, and then I'll hand over to Chris to talk a little bit about the team, and I'm going to get Mark to chat a little bit about that resuscitative hysterotomy. But firstly, as the tachycardia sets in and the side of this debrief, I'm interested, how do you modulate your own behaviour as you're going to a job where you know that there's a pregnant lady who might need a resuscitative hysterotomy, because, you know, in Simland, that was always going to happen. Yeah. So how do you modulate your own behaviour and your heart rate?
In that specific clinical scenario, you're definitely going through it in your head. You're definitely doing that mental rehearsal. As was talked earlier in the day, the sort of 0-point survey, I make sure, in fact, backstage, I make sure I'd been to the toilet, had eaten, and was kind of ready mentally and physically.
Yeah.
Those are the main things.
Okay. Liv, have you got any routine that you do before a mission or on the way to a mission like that?
I really just try and remind myself that I've been trained to within an inch of my life, and it has to come back to trust as well. Like, I'm going to get there and I have to trust that we're going to do the very best that we can on the day. And yeah, I've got so many resources to pull upon, my own, Sandeep's, and yeah, like, I don't think the perfect job exists also, which is another thing that I remind myself of. So when stuff falls on the ground, when you're messing around with a gown, you go, well, this is life, and you try not to let it fluster you, and you feel that moment of fluster, and you just go, well, no, this is all part of it, and you try and reset.
Okay.
And that happens 100 times throughout every job, and as you feel that come over you, you just try and reset. Breathing's probably the biggest way that I do that.
Yeah. So there was a moment for me where I felt my heart rate rise, and a little bit of a punch in the stomach, and actually a little tear in my eye as the team recognised Jules, our patient. Did that affect either of you, and how did you respond to that?
Well, I think it just stopped almost the scenario, paused it at least for a little while as people just came to terms with what they've just recognised. And then I found out about Libby, but I noticed that, and that stopped me in my tracks as well. I was like, this is such a difficult situation for these guys to deal with.
Yeah, and we all want to just continue moving forward with the momentum of the clinical priorities, but right now that's not what's needed. We need to find and buy that 5 to 10 seconds to acknowledge the enormity of this is a known person. We are humans, and if we didn't have that emotional response, we probably shouldn't be doing the job that we're doing. And as much as clinically you can just feel this, like, keep moving, you have to physically pull the handbrake on and go, nah, we need to find this 5 to 10 seconds to acknowledge the enormity of this. And it feels so uncomfortable, but it feels so right as well. In that scenario, it did.
Yeah, absolutely. I certainly felt uncomfortable but right, and I'm glad that I'm a human that has reactions like that to moments like that. Chris?
Yeah, I mean, this is a fascinating scenario to watch from a human factors and team perspective, because from my observation, it was really two pretty autonomously functioning teams, right? A HEMS team and a hospital team that kind of came together with the process of patient handover, and then there's this kind of natural pulling apart, I guess, as there's a transition in care, and then you were ran back together again by the necessity of you guys having to perform a procedure on the patient. And it was remarkable. We spoke a bit about implicit coordination earlier today. It was quite remarkable to watch the teams function so implicitly. This was a really quiet resuscitation, wasn't it? I had a question initially when you mentioned that creating that sort of emotional space of, hold on a sec, there's an emotional gut punch here, we have to acknowledge that before we move on. You went to the team leader and said, is there anything I can do? And what I saw was you kind of got a hand to say, we got this. And I wasn't sure if that was helpful or harmful in terms of understanding what your role was meant to be at that moment. It seemed to be meant to convey a sense of, we're in control, we have this, we can move forward. But I'm wondering if that helped you or hindered what you understood your role to be at the time, knowing that you were moving towards a hysterotomy.
You're talking about putting your hand on his shoulder to...
Yeah, you had this very lovely moment where you said, look, I know you know this patient, is there anything we can do?
Yeah.
And what you got back was a little bit of, we got this, which I think was meant to be reassuring, but it almost was a little bit, confronting the way it was offered. How did you guys take that? Was it helpful? Was it harmful?
I was trying to offer some support, and also I didn't really know how he was going to react, and I just wanted to make sure that he wasn't needing me to do much else. But I just mainly just offering that support and to make sure that we're here to help if we need to.
Libby, did it seem clear where you were meant to go?
I mean, seeing Rob, who was the team leader at that point, because, officially we'd handed over, he was like, no, we still got this. But it was actually nice to hear that, because it's like, we've come to you because we've exhausted what we can do out in the field, and the fact that he was still going to be, and his team was still going to be looking after this patient, because we needed more than two of us. Regardless of what trajectory this patient was going to take, we needed him on board, and it was actually reassuring for me to hear him say, no, we've still got this. But we were still physically very embedded in the patient at that point, and I think that's probably why I felt compelled to say, we've got nowhere else to be. Let us know what you want to do, because we did get that. But it's kind of like, that's okay, she is your patient, but we're not going anywhere. Use as much or as little as you like. And I suppose that's probably what drove my comment to say that. And
that struck me as a wonderful response, right? Hey, look, we got all the time in the world, man. We're here if you need us, which is this wonderful sort of concept of mutual support and backup behavior that teams, when they're functioning at a high level, are supposed to offer, right? All right, you don't need us right now, but you might in a moment. We're here for you. And that, I guess, leads to my second question, which was, well, there was this sort of, we've got this, we've got it under control. And then there was actually, here we are now needing a resuscitative hysterotomy, we need to go. And what I noticed about how the team played out, there was really 3 teams here, right? Wasn't there? There was a very divisional structure to how the teams played out. There was your resuscitation team, your neonatal team, and your hysterotomy team. Were you aware of how that divisional structure was playing out? Was it helpful? Was it harmful? Your situation awareness was by necessity somewhat constrained to the procedure you're doing. But in a circumstance like this, that can actually be quite helpful for you.
In a way,
how did that function for you?
I mean, in a way, it was good to be doing a targeted task because having just transported this patient, done all the work pre-hospital, we were probably kind of exhausted. But then being drawn back in, if it was a task that we've practiced and rehearsed, then it was quite good to just do a focused task and not worry about the rest of the resuscitation, having the confidence that Rob had the overall team leading under control.
Libby, do you get the same sense?
Yeah, and I don't know how it was to watch, but I was sort of thinking, we're going to have a baby, like who's going to look after the baby? Who's going to, because at that point I hadn't realised that there'd been talk of this other miraculous third team, they were going to appear. I hadn't realised they'd actually come in. I said, we're going to need a maternity kit, and I turn around, there's this trolley, and I'm like, beauty. Like, that's cool, we can just focus on the hysterotomy. They're going to do the top end of the patient, and then once the baby appears, they're going to do that bit. And it allowed us, well, for me, to compartmentalise, all right, I'm Sandeep's left-hand man, and that's what we're going to be doing, and they've got the rest. And I suppose when you're resource poor, had I turned around and then not been a maternity kit or whatever, then that's where you're thinking, okay, all right, our job isn't just this, it's, multiple things or however it plays out.
There is much to be said about situational awareness, though, and we always hear about how you're supposed to sort of draw back and look at the big picture. But in a circumstance like this, where there are so many competing priorities, it can actually be really helpful for you to kind of shrink your worldview, right? You were the hysterotomy team, what was going on at the head of the bed, not your problem. What was going on with the neonatal resuscitation, not your thing right now. And that can be very empowering to act, right? Because it limits by necessity the number of things that you need to pay attention. It was really fascinating to watch how that enabled you to go ahead with what's a really sort of challenging and confronting procedure.
I mean, can I just add, you guys were just awesome, the whole team, but I mean, you were absolutely amazing delivering that there. I'm going to ask the obvious question. I mean, how did it feel?
The model or the?
Yeah, how did it feel to, have you ever done a resuscitative hysterotomy?
No, I have on a pretty real life mannequin. It was, yeah. So it was very high fidelity, really lifelike. The skin was, felt like skin. It was like a silicone thing. And then I think the main thing, once we got through the skin, subcutaneous fat down into the peritoneum, there was covering. I was expecting some amniotic fluid, and then there was bleeding. So everything that I imagine is going to be there was there. It was pretty realistic. I don't know what you felt.
Yeah, but I also loved, again, you know, same as me messing around with a gown over here. It was a couple of goes of getting through certain sections and what have you, because it isn't something that's just inherently, we have an idea of it's step 1 to step 2 to step 3, but having the opportunity to see this, you're like, okay, it took a couple of goes, but you know.
I think that's beautifully described, because, you know, we've all talked about these procedures, we've gone through them with mental modelling and all that, and then we've even done them on some great simulators, but when you actually get to do it, it often feels completely different, and that can throw you. And I thought you guys you're task focused and you just plowed through it. There were a couple of little things. Obviously, we always learn things. The utilization of your equipment, your arrangements of your equipment, talking about thinking steps ahead. Anything you'd have done differently, particularly around that?
Yeah, I mean, when we were getting set up, I think some of the equipment was next to the patient on the bed, some of it was on the trolley that we'd set up. Ideally, I'd like it all together, so we can just grab one thing after the other and just keep going. But the nature of the scenario was such that we had got thrown into it before we were kind of ready and kits were open. And so, yeah, there's definitely...
Yeah, no, I mean, there's always little things, and that's all part of the learning process and why we go through the sims. And I think you make a really good point, as we just discussed, the fact that you guys landed and your adrenaline levels were coming down, and it's almost that feigned retreat where you talk about in military terms, where you just think it's all over for us now, we can just, you know, see your medals, but then suddenly, woof, you're right back up again and you're back in the spotlight. And that could be quite hard, particularly if you turn around and there was no resuscitator and no ped, you'd be on to the next bike then. So, but I thought you handled it really well. That was great, guys. Thank you.
Fantastic. So to summarize, I guess we hit kind of 3 major points with the debrief. First of all, echo what everyone else said. I mean, you guys and the entire team did a wonderful job. The emotional nature of the scenario was not ignored, and I think that's really important, right? We often look at performance as maybe shoving the emotional side of things to the side and kind of white-knuckling through it. You didn't do that. You acknowledged it. You took a moment to offer support. That sort of mutual support and backup behavior, from my eye, was kind of key to facilitating that interaction between the 2 teams. And then you broke everything down. There was a real divisional structure to how you move forward, and very deliberately constraining your sense of situation awareness, near field situation awareness, as opposed to far field, really allowed you guys to be focused and do what you needed to do and trust. You had mentioned trust before. You trusted that everyone else was going to do the same. And then from a procedures point of view, it is about sort of environmental engineering and tweaking, right? Like in an ideal world, there'd be different ways you'd lay it out, different things that you would do next time, but tweaking that sort of environmental control is so critically important when you're talking about a high-stakes rare procedure like that. So again, fantastic job, guys, and it was a pleasure watching you.
Big shout out for Karma, our patients as well.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you for the opportunity.